So I'm Jennifer Pristina. I'm head of marketing for Predictable. So welcome to everyone. I see a few attendees that came to our last webinar. So thanks for coming back. As most of you probably already know, Predictable is the cyber startup behind Project Holodeck. We're working with the SAF-MG team to build out our innovation software so the entire process of innovation becomes easier and faster for the Air Force. I don't know how many of you have been in our product thus far, but at this point, we've only rolled out a small piece of our technology. But in the coming months, we're actually going to launch a lot more capabilities that we're really excited to share. So this quick talk series was really designed to further empower the Air Force with innovation best practices kind of outside of software. And we decided to kick off with the invisible enemies of innovation because these are challenges that have come up not only in our work with the Air Force, but also with large corporations as well. And these enemies are a big reason why our founder started Predictable in the first place. So you'll see the invisible enemies on our screen. We still have one spot left. So if there are any particular challenges that you've experienced in innovation that you can think to add here, we would love to hear about them. So you can just put those in suggestions in chat at any point during this webinar. So with that, I'd like to introduce you to Neil Soni, who is, he's basically an innovation rock star. He led growth at several venture-backed companies and has built innovation programs for companies like Estee Lauder and Comcast, but he's probably most known for a book that he wrote called The Startup Goldmine, which is all about leveraging external innovation and subject matter experts to get out of kind of the dreaded innovation silo that we're going to talk about today. So with that, I'll hand the floor over to Neil so he can tell you about some of the most effective ways to solve this problem.
Thanks, Jennifer. Yeah, excited to be here, everyone. So just to elaborate a little bit on what Jennifer shared in that great intro, I've worked with a lot of large organizations on innovation programs, particularly external innovation programs. So what I mean when I say external innovation does not just mean, collaborating with startups. I think that's a common misconception in sort of this innovation ecosystem that we live in, that external innovation always means, hey, we have to go work, find a startup and collaborate with them. That's certainly one example of external innovation, but it could also be getting outside of your silo, which we'll talk about in a second, and working with other parts of an existing organization. So essentially internally. It could also mean collaborating with other large organizations. It could be collaborating with other subject matter experts. So external innovation is not always startup partnership programs. So just kind of wanted to talk about that up front. To elaborate a little bit on the book, the book is primarily targeted for people who are trying to work with large organizations, and was actually kind of inspired by some frustrations I had when I was purely on the startup side trying to work with large companies and kind of running into a lot of roadblocks just simply because I didn't understand how incentive structures worked and budgets worked and timing worked. And so the book is really an answer to that, and kind of the book that I wish I had when I first got started with startups. But today we're going to be talking about solving this innovation enemy of working in a silo. When we talk about working in a silo, we mean, so I'll give you one example, I guess, from a personal experience. When I was at Estee Lauder, we had kind of our existing vendors that we worked with on everything, given areas. Let's say makeup, we had certain vendors; skincare, we had certain vendors; fragrance, we had certain vendors. And then we have our internal silo of, the fragrance R&D group only works on fragrance, and you have the fragrance packaging group only works on fragrance packaging. That's a silo. And that's great. I mean, that actually works really well for a lot of, call it incremental innovation. I think that structure is working pretty nicely. Where it gets difficult is working with your silo on things that are a little bit maybe outside of the core business, whether that is trying to reach new markets, trying to solve problems for new customers, trying to acquire different customers, and certainly for trying to develop new business models. It's really hard to go through that silo process. And so that's where kind of an external approach can come in. And that external approach, again, could be collaborating with other parts of an existing company that are just outside of your silo, or it could mean collaborating with external entities. I've seen in my experience two major causes for kind of getting trapped in this silo mentality. The first is companies often, and any organization, to be honest, this can happen at a small company as well as a large organization. They incentivize internal or sort of traditional ways of doing things versus, let's say, the just solving the problem. And kind of a quick, like overly simple example of that is if it takes, let's say, 12 months to solve a problem in your lab, you would often get more credit for that than if you found an external company who had already solved the problem and you could bring that solution in-house. It's just a simple matter of it looks like it took more work and effort to do it the first way. And that's also just kind of like human nature to incentivize things like that. And so it's up to leaders, which we'll talk about in a second, to incentivize problem solving over the amount of work that goes into something, let's say. And then the second thing is culture, which I have an example of, which I'll share in a second, where sometimes there are internal rivalries or competition that prevents you from getting outside of your silo and kind of working in a collaborative or alliance-based format. So what are those two philosophical examples? So this is a story from my time, again, at Estee Lauder, where I spent a few years building out the external innovation program. So Estee Lauder has about 40 to 45 brands under the sort of corporate umbrella. They're all run semi-autonomously, and because of that, they have a lot of leeway in sort of how they're run and the culture, especially in how they run. So the two largest brands and the two oldest brands in the company are Estee Lauder and Clinique. Both of those brands kind of date back to when Estee Lauder herself, the founder of the company, was running the business. And she essentially gave each of her sons, so she has two sons, one of them got the Estee Lauder brand, one of them got the Clinique brand. And as you might imagine, that created a little bit of sibling rivalry to the point where I believe it's been about 60 years since that happened. To this day, those two brands do not collaborate. There's essentially a firewall between the two of them that prevents them from sharing knowledge, sharing technology, really sharing anything with each other. And this causes some tension internally. So as somebody who is working with all brands, not just Estee Lauder, not just Clinique, but effectively all 40 brands within the company, I had to be really careful that if I share something with Clinique, I can't also share it with Estee Lauder. So it creates tension and honestly really promotes working in silos because you're just kind of forced to culturally. In contrast, there are two other brands which arguably are competitors. So one is Smashbox and one is MAC. They're also under the Estee Lauder corporate umbrella. Smashbox is probably 1/10, maybe 1/15 the size of MAC, so it's certainly a lot smaller, but they're going after roughly the same customer. They're both makeup brands, and so you could imagine that they would also have a sort of competition-based approach to innovation, where they don't want to share with each other, they don't want to collaborate, but instead, what the approach that they've taken is Smashbox operates as an innovation lab in many ways for MAC. So Smashbox is the one that's trying newer technologies. They're trialing things in their retail environment, on their website with their products. And if it goes well, it often, will get elevated to MAC. And so they take a completely different approach and figured out ways to collaborate with each other rather than put that firewall up. And so that's kind of, in my opinion, and in my experience, a great example actually of two brands which, culturally could be in competition with each other, but instead found, hey, Smashbox is not going to be the size of MAC. It's a much smaller brand, it's a much more niche brand. Maybe there are ways that they can work together for mutual benefit. So that's kind of the approach that I like to promote with companies that I work with. Going back to the types of external innovation, there are kind of two different approaches. So there's getting outside of your internal silo. So that could mean that's like the Smashbox and MAC example, or there is the getting outside of your organization. So obviously both of those have their own process and their own pros and cons, which we'll get into in a second. But I just wanted to reiterate that external innovation is not just getting out of your company, but that you can also do it internally. So a couple examples just to get a little more concrete with what external innovation actually is. So I'll give you one example from Estee Lauder, one from the pharma industry, just so there's a little bit of variety here. At Estee Lauder, there was a product which you may be familiar with. It's called a sheet mask. You may have seen these. These are essentially like a mask that somebody wears on their face for a period of time. It's infused with like a liquid or a lotion of some sort. There's a variety of different types that you can get, and you take them off after 20 minutes, 30 minutes. Some of them are designed to be worn for even longer. And they were getting pretty popular when I was at Estee Lauder. So it was kind of like a new innovation at the time. Now it's extremely mainstream. There's one problem with the Estee Lauder product when I got there was we don't have any paper expertise, and that product is 50% paper. It's 50% beauty product and 50% paper product. And we were just buying a sort of off the shelf paper substrate from an existing supplier, very much working in our silo. And to be honest, it wasn't going very well. I mean, the product was retailing at probably the highest price in the industry. The reviews were not great. People thought, they weren't getting what they were paying for. And so we were faced with a couple choices. One was, let's go hire a team of people who know a lot about paper and bring them into our R&D group so we have some expertise. That's the expensive way. That's the time takes a while, right? You got to find these people, hire them. I mean, you're talking about a year plus process to stand up this group. And this is where it kind of landed into my lap, was let's do this via partnership. Maybe there's a company out there that is a paper expert, and we can work together to actually develop a great product. And so that's exactly what we did. We formed a partnership with a company that is a large paper brand. They were never going to enter the beauty industry, so there was not any issue of being competitors. And so we kind of put our expertise with their expertise, and they effectively became our paper partner. And it was a really interesting way to solve a problem that, instead of taking multiple years, the turnaround time was closer to months. And so to me, that was like my first huge example of, okay, we can actually drive real results with partnerships in a compressed amount of time. So it's kind of a win-win there. And then kind of more tied to the pharmaceutical industry, I think this is my own personal opinion. They are the furthest along, I would say, in taking a portfolio approach to external partners. So if you look at what companies, like Pfizer or Merck or some of the other large pharma companies out there, they do a lot of partner-driven development. So of course, they have their own R&D teams, and I'm not downplaying that, but they also do a lot of external partnerships to enter new areas of business. So whether that's diseases that they haven't treated before, whether that's types of technology platforms that they don't have themselves, they do these partnerships. And those partnerships, if you look at the top line, the dollars are very, very high. So you'll see, $100 million plus deals that they're doing. But what you don't see under the hood, or I guess you can see if you dig in a little bit deeper, is a lot of those partnerships are milestone driven. So there are easy outs if they don't succeed or they don't pass certain milestones. So that could be testing, or that could be market. All of these deals are unique in their own way, but basically they've taken a real portfolio driven approach to external innovation. And I think there's some real inspiration we can all draw from that in other industries. So now getting into tactics, how can we actually get out of silos and promote external innovation within our organizations? So the first really comes down to incentives. I alluded to this earlier, but as organizations, very often we give credit kind of based on how hard a task is or how hard we perceive it to be. So that example I gave, that overly simplified example where somebody worked on something internally, let's say within R&D for 12 months, versus they went and found an external partner who already had developed a technology that does the same thing. Maybe that took 3 months. Often we would incentivize somebody inadvertently. Most often, it's not an explicit thing, but inadvertently we'd give more credit to somebody who spent 12 months working hard on something versus solve the problem externally. And so I think aligning incentives in a way that is more solution based rather than effort or work based is one way to kind of at least help promote the external innovation approach. And by the way, this doesn't have to be financial incentives. I think should have made that clear up front. Financial incentives are, one way of doing this, but it could even just be who gets a pat on the back. People like getting recognition for a job well done, and too many times inadvertently we are incentivizing people to develop things in-house. Second is involving everyone. So I've seen this happen firsthand. Actually, I've been the person becoming accidentally into a silo myself in my external innovation roles, where too often and you'll see this if you look at some of the people working in external innovation, they'll have the term external innovation in their title. They're out scouting for whether it's startups, other companies, research groups, universities. They're out looking for technology that they can bring in-house. And that's great. But the problem is, if that person is not also being involved internally in the sense of staying up to date on what the market looks like, staying up to date on where the goals of the organization are, being kept in the loop on the progress of existing projects, the things like that person can get isolated really quickly and kind of lose touch with what's going on. And so the better approach and kind of the more successful approach that I've seen, let's say, is when everybody is involved in this process in one way, shape, or form. It doesn't mean everybody is out scouting for different technologies, but it means they're working together as a team rather than, hey, the team is working on this, and then you have this external innovation person out here doing their own thing. So it's really got to be a team effort. And so as much as you can involve everybody in this process, whether that's just information sharing, whether that's making sure there's a regular cadence in terms of communication between external and internal folks. It's really about keeping everybody involved in the process. Next is cultivating outside partners. And so I know we've talked a lot about getting out of silos internally, but there's a lot of advantage to working with outside, whether that's outside companies or outside individuals. And this might not even be in a formal capacity. It could just be in communication lines and understanding, what are they seeing out there, especially if, let's say in a tangible example, there's a technology area you're interested in, let's say batteries or energy, for example. There are a lot of people out there working on that, whether that's at universities, whether that's investors, people who have already actively out there scouting. And it doesn't mean you have to do anything formal with those groups, but just simply keeping an open line of communication. They share what they're seeing, you share what you're seeing, can go a long way to just keeping you in the loop of what's going on out there, rather than again kind of getting stuck in a silo. And last but certainly not least, arguably the most important, is that leadership really sets the tone. So if you're a leader and you see your team sees you looking for solutions from all over your own organization, whether that's within your silo or getting outside and talking to other people, talking to other leaders, or even outside of your organization entirely, talking to people in industry or talking to investors or talking to startups, for example, that sets the tone for everybody. And it really makes it clear that, we're going to go solve these problems, whether the solution is found here or it's found somewhere else. And then that's really kind of where it all starts. And then everything else bleeds down from under that. So just to summarize, incentives, involving everyone, cultivating your outside relationships, and making sure the leaders are setting the tone. Those are kind of the 4 ways that I've seen work really well in terms of getting out of silos and driving external innovation across the org. And hopefully we have some time for Q&A.
We actually had a couple of questions come through. This is an awesome question. I think you're going to like it because you talked a lot about external innovation, but I know that you also really care about kind of innovation culture as a whole. So this was a great question. How does investing in internal innovation affect company culture?
Yeah, I think it affects it in a bunch of ways. I mean, number one, it makes people feel more empowered, especially if that internal innovation is maybe employee driven or the ideas are coming from top down and bottom up, right? There's a mix of that. I think it keeps everybody involved. So I think in general, it makes people feel more empowered, which is a great thing, more excited about their job, more excited about getting out of bed in the morning. I mean, these are all really good things. Yeah, and I think also the word innovation is a tough one because, or it's an ambiguous one, I should say, because it can mean so many things to so many different people. And so, when we say internal innovation, I mean, that could mean so many things, right? It could mean you're starting a new like business process to solve a problem. It could be developing a whole new technology. I mean, there's so many things that means, but generally, I think involving the team in innovation in any way, shape, or form is a good thing.
Really good points. So there was actually a second part to that question, and that is, what can leaders do to avoid accidentally incentivizing internal innovation over external?
Yeah, I mean, one is just the whole effort thing that I was talking about, where it's just human nature too, because that's the hard thing. Because I do the exact same thing. Is like if I see somebody working on something for 6 months or something like that, right? It's like versus somebody else solved the problem in a shorter amount of time, or maybe there was a way to solve the problem in a shorter amount of time. I'm just inadvertently going to think that the person who worked longer and harder on that did a better job, right? And so many times external innovation is not necessarily a shortcut, but somebody else has already done a lot of that legwork, and you're just finding a way to work together in a win-win way with them. And so it might be seen internally as, okay, all you did was find a company to help us solve this, or you found an outside expert to help us solve this. Like you didn't do anything. You know what I mean? Like versus this person, worked so hard in the lab to solve this problem. So obviously they did more work, and it's true they did more work, but from a problem solution standpoint, uh, they both solved the problem. Let's say, right? And so too many times I think we just maybe it's not that we disincentivize, but we don't give the credit to the person who found the external solution as much as we would to somebody who did it internally. So that's number one, is just being cognizant of that and kind of changing your mindset to solution rather than effort.
All right, I'm going to throw one more question. I know we're a little bit over time here, but I thought this was a good question, so I'm going to throw it out to you. Just can you elaborate a little bit more on cultivating those outside partnerships?
Yeah, so I think like there's a couple things that are like low hanging fruit, right? So that is, I think the investor one, which I started talking about, is an underutilized one for innovation groups in general, or any large org trying to innovate. So investors have like their job is to go out and find companies that they can go invest in, and a lot of these investment groups or funds are thematic, meaning they have certain focus areas. So some are sustainability focused, some are energy focused, some are ag tech, some are fintech, right? So there's all these different categories essentially. Some are more agnostic, like they'll just invest in any company as long as it's a certain stage that they're interested in. But the ones that have a certain theme, you can work with those firms to essentially do a lot of the scouting work for you. I don't want to say all of your scouting work because your needs, only what exactly you're looking for, but you can a lot of times get access to their pipeline because those firms want to show to startups that, hey, we have all these great relationships with large organizations too. So they're happy to work with you and share their opportunities or their pipeline with you just because it makes them look good too. So that's low hanging fruit, in my opinion, for any large organization. Go create as many of those investor partnerships as you can. And then I think there are also like, startup groups or entrepreneurs that you can just kind of get friendly with, in the sense that, especially if there's something that maybe they're not ready today for you to work with, they're not far enough along, but just start kind of developing that relationship. Last but not least, like, and I think actually the Air Force does this in some ways already, is just putting some text on your site or a page on your site that has more information about what you're looking for. So like AFWorks has this where they have certain challenges. Some companies call this open innovation, some call it outside innovation, but just kind of putting it out there, like this is what we're looking for. And you'd be surprised that startups want to know that, or people in the ecosystem want to know that, and they'll send people your way.
Yeah, those are really good points, and we've had fun with a lot of the Air Force challenges as well. anyhow, we are out of time. There were a few questions that we didn't get to. I'm going to save those, and we'll email some responses to the outstanding questions. But Neil, thank you so much for your time. You're so incredible to talk to you about all of this innovation stuff. So thank you for your time, and also thank you to everyone who joined us today. Feel free to email me. My email address is here on the screen. Email me any questions that you have, or any feedback that you have as well. We'd love to hear about it. And we'll also be sending around our schedule for our upcoming webinars. So we hope that you all can join. So thank you so much, and we will see you soon.
All right, thanks everyone.